Hi there, I'm Michael Dillard. Welcome to Santa Barbara Wargaming. We have some afterthoughts for a 100-point game we played. I played my Retribution.
I played Signar, specifically running Kane 2 and Cray as my casters.
I had Adeptus Ron Shield. I also had Lord Arcanist Ossian as my two casters. 100-point games are interesting for us. They're a relatively new phenomenon, but we saw Lock and Load and Privateer Press push them quite a bit, and they've been interesting. I think the most interesting thing about 100-point games is, well, besides having so many units to control, is seeing how warcasters, both yours and your opponents, interact with one another. How feats interact, potential synergies between spells, that sort of thing. Did we see any interesting examples of that this game?
I wouldn't say there's any direct impacts for that because just the casters we took and the way the game played out. What really intrigues me about 100-point games is it really makes the deployment phase a lot more important in the game. Like something I really, it's both a good and a bad thing. It's a good thing because it makes you think more during your deployment phase, but it's a bad thing because one thing I really like about War Machine and Hordes is that nothing is decided after the deployment phase. Like a few other war games that I play, I feel like a good portion of the game is completed at the end of putting down your models because your models only have a certain amount of area they can cover, only have a certain amount of threat ranges, whereas War Machine Hordes is a lot more flexible. But in a 100-point game, you're really kind of crammed in, so there's not really enough room to maneuver. If you put some models on the wrong flank, they are not going to be able to make it over to the left flank, even if they run, just because there's so many models in the way. That said, I would say that a few positives about a 100-point game is, like Michael said, the way the feats interact, the way the spells interact. You have two casters, and what ended up happening is that Michael killed one of my casters fairly early on, but I was still in the game. It wasn't over because I still had one warcaster. I still had a large amount of infantry that could play. So it's not quite as quickly completed as a 50-point single caster game, but I would still consider 50-point single caster as kind of the gold standard of competitive play, and I don't think 100 points two caster is going to replace that anytime soon.
I agree. I think another really interesting component that Aaron touched upon is you really have to think about which warjacks belong to which battle groups and which spells might be, for example, battle group only when it comes to sort of building your synergies and building your overall strategy in getting everything organized. You know, if you lose your warcaster and that warcaster, for example, is controlling 2/3 of your warjacks and they either have to be reactivated or simply fall out of play, you know, that's huge. That's potentially debilitating. But if you have a warcaster who isn't necessarily responsible for a lot of jacks or a warlock for beasts or whatever, you can play that warcaster more aggressively in a way that I think is interesting and we never see in single caster games. You know, so warcasters that are potential combat monsters, effective at shooting, whatever, you can be more aggressive with them than you might be ordinarily, which can obviously be a pro and a con. You can get them into a really devastating position, be really ambitious, really go for it in terms of getting the most out of their killing power. But obviously if you lose them, it can potentially hurt you if you've invested too many of your warjack or warbeast allotment in their battle group specifically.
Did you see any interesting spell synergies between the different units that you've taken and the different casters that you selected?
I mean, the question we've already addressed. To some extent, yeah, we did. I mean, it wasn't huge. It wasn't necessarily as dramatic as we've seen in other games. But, you know, one example might be Ron, you know, using telekinesis to move a warjack 2 inches, and then Ossian using Quicken to add 2 inches to that jack's movement, potentially allowing a huge charge and tremendous threat range.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the two casters that I chose had a huge amount of synergy between each other. I was originally going to take Siege and Haley, which I think would have had more synergy with each other, but I just got Kane, and I also wanted to try Cray out some more because I really enjoy him. So I feel like some pairings of casters would have a huge amount of synergy. An obvious one would be Raven and Ossian. Michael and I were discussing this earlier, where if they both pop their feats, you get a turn of super shooting, where basically 3 dice on attacks and 3+ dice on damage, which obviously can be very devastating if used properly. Another when I was originally conceiving this list with Siege and Haley, they also have great synergies between their feet as well, because Siege can pop his feet half the arm of every model within his control area for their first hit, and then Haley can pop her feet, which gives every model in her control area 2 shots. So that can be very devastating as well, because you can get shots on everything and really benefit more from Siege's feet, the half arm, than you normally would in a 50-point game.
Okay, it's only been a little while, maybe an hour since you guys played. Have you thought about taking another caster, or swapping out one caster, swapping out both casters, if you guys were to have a rematch?
For me, I would say that I don't think Kane did a whole lot for me. Part of that was poor tactical decisions on my part in allowing him to be assassinated early on by some feated battle mages, so the 3 dice to hit. On average dice, Michael was killing me, and he did manage to kill me quite handedly. So I would say that Kane probably isn't the best choice in that matchup if Michael's taking those casters, because Ossian and Ron are both pretty backfield casters, and Kane kind of excels when he can assassinate casters, and they weren't in range for assassination. So I would probably replace him with like a Siege, or maybe a Nemo 3, just to deal with Michael's hordes of infantry.
How about you, Michael?
I was pretty pleased with the way the Warcasters performed. The reason I went with Ron and Ossian specifically, as opposed to, say, Ron and Raven, who I've used in the past, to sort of combine their feats. The reason I like Ron is because he can really sort of strike from an unexpected quarter, and he also allows his battle group a great deal of flexibility. Obvious things like telekinesis. Telekinesis is going to have a place in any game you play. It's always going to be useful. Chain blast to be able to clear out swaths of infantry, and then you can really get more mileage out of his feat as well, because having so many points available really lets you sort of load up on battle mages. I usually use 1 unit of battle mages in my Ron list. Here I was able to borrow a unit from Aaron in order to use 2, so it really allowed his feat turn to create quite a fusillade of shooting and really create a lot of battlefield control and devastation for 1 quadrant of the board, and was able to get a caster kill here. One thing that I might add in just for the sake of experimentation would be Hyperion, proxying Hyperion. Of course, the model's not out yet, but at these big point games, I think that you see Colossals having a lot less of an impact than they might in smaller point games. They're less of a focal point, and you have more troops available, more resources available to potentially handle a Colossus. And obviously it's a target-rich environment for a Colossi as well. No shortage of ways that they can help your overall battle plan, and lots of spells or feats or synergies that you can create with them. So they become, I think, a more assimilated, more fluid unit than they might be in, say, a 35-point or even a 50-point game.
So we talked a little bit about Colossals. How about battle engines? Would you maybe take the Arcantric Force Generator?
If I owned one, I might. I think that this is really
better rules.
Yeah, this is really
with
a point
Ossian
value.
and Raven. How about that? With Ossian and Raven,
with Ossian and Raven, sure. Having another range knockdown, having another shooting unit, having access to their feats can potentially. I could see getting a lot of mileage out of the Arcantric Force Generator. I'm still not necessarily purchasing one, but if I had it, I would give it a try. And the nice thing about 100-point games, too, is it lets you try those units that you may not love enough to include in your 35 or 50-point lists, but you can certainly try out and experiment with because you have so many points to play with.
One negative to a battle engine is that it's already so crowded. Adding another battle engine, another huge base, really claims a lot of real estate that you might not necessarily have available. Like Michael and I, we were using up that entire 4x4. The entire length of the 4x4 was covered in units. So adding another 5-inch model really makes it even more difficult, and you really struggle to get the charge lanes and get the line of sight ranges that you want. That said, I definitely would take a Storm Strider if I owned one, because they're fantastic battle engines. But if I was playing Retribution, I would not take an Arcantric Force Generator because they're terrible.
Okay. Any last thoughts before we sign off here? About your game, about the point size, about prospective casters?
No, it was a lot of fun. I look forward to playing 100 points in the future. They definitely will not replace smaller games for me, because I enjoy smaller games more, and I feel like they're more challenging. But I do enjoy them for what they are, and I will definitely pursue them in the future.
Michael?
I agree wholeheartedly. I don't think they should be viewed as a substitute for smaller games, but they create a very different feel and allow players to really experiment with some fun different synergies or some different unit types that they wouldn't be able to use normally. It's a nice way to sort of step outside the box and experiment with all the different units or even different warcasters your faction has available that you might not necessarily try out ordinarily. This is Santa Barbara Wargaming. Michael and Aaron signing off. Thanks for listening.